All right, mean, median, and mode. These are all measures of central tendency. And mean is the average. So it's the sum of the numbers. That means if you add them all up, remember sum means to add, and you divide it by the amount of numbers, or how many numbers there are. So let's say, for example, we wanted to find the mean for the group of numbers 2, 7, 3, and 4. Well, we would calculate it by adding them all up. So 2 plus 7 plus 3 plus 4. And then dividing by how many there are. Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers. So we would divide by 4. And I'm going to put that top part in parentheses because that all represents one number. That's our sum. And when I'm adding them, I'm using commutative properties. So 7 plus 3, I'm going to add first and get 10. And then 2 plus 4, I'm going to add and get 6. 10 plus 6 is 16. So it's 16 over 4, which just equals 4. So our mean is 4. And notice you can work backwards. If you know the actual mean, you can multiply it by how many numbers there are to get your total. So we could check it. 4 times 4 would give us 16. All right, so that sums up mean. Let's move on to median. Next we have the word median. And think of the median on a road. The median on a road is just that middle part here. It's the grassy area. So it's the middle of this divided highway. Well, in math, it's the same thing, except it's the middle of the numbers when they're arranged from least to greatest. So if there's an even number of numbers, you find their average. If it's an odd number, it's just the middle number. But if it's an even amount of numbers, you find their average. And what I mean by that is you just add them and divide by 2. So add and divide by 2. Or add them and take half of it. That means the same thing. So an example for median, if we wanted to find the median of this set of numbers, 3, 2, 8, 3, 4, and 7, the first thing we would do is set them in order from least to greatest. So I'm going to rewrite them, 2, 3, 3, and it helps when you're doing this if you just mark them off. So I've done the 2, I've done the 3, and now next I have 4 and 7 and then 8. And just make sure that you've accounted for all the numbers. It's also a good idea to count these up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just double check that you've been accurate. All right, and now as we're finding the middle number, I have an even amount of numbers, so I know that there's going to be 2 middle numbers. So cross off the 2, cross off the 8, cross off the 3, cross off the 7. I have 2 middle numbers, so I just take their average. So I just do add these up, divide by 2. So 3 plus 4 equals 7 over 2, which is half of 7 is 3.5, or 3.5. Another way you can think of that is, what is halfway between 3 and 4? And that number is always going to end in a half, right? Halfway between 3 and 4 is 3.5. What if it would have said halfway between 5 and 7? That'd be 6, right? Halfway between 5 and 7 is 6, because 6 is one apart from each of those. All right, let's move on to mode. Okay, mode is most. Think of mode as most. And they both start with MO, so that's pretty easy to remember. And it's the number that occurs most often. Now, there can be no mode, there can be one mode, or there can be multiple amounts of modes. So there's no mode whenever the most number occurs as once. That would be no mode. There's one mode if there's one number that occurs more than once. Like if you have a number that occurs twice, or one number that occurs 4 times. And multiple modes would be whenever you have numbers that occur more than once. So for instance, if 2 numbers occurred 3 times, there could be 2 modes. So let's do an example. And a lot of times when I give a test, there'll be a mode on the test. If it's an easy quiz, there might be a lot of 100s on a quiz, if it's an easy one. Okay, so for our mode, let's do 7, 6, 12, 6, 7, and 11. And I'm just looking to see what occurs more than once. So 7 occurs twice. And then 6 occurs twice. 11 and 12 only occur once. So 6 and 7, we're going to say the mode is 6 and 7. And the reason that is because they both occur twice. Now, I just want to clarify, if there would have been 11, if there would have been 2 more 11s written down, I'll put this in a different color so you know I'm not adding to it. If there would have been 2 more 11s written down, then 11 would have been our mode, not 6 and 7. So it's just the number that occurs the most often. So here it was 6 and 7. All right, our next term is outlier, and think of an outcast. An outcast is somebody who's far different from others. Well, it's the same with numbers. An outlier, and notice what I've done with the definition, it lies outside. So outlier, if you just put that arrangement backwards, you have the word. It lies outside of the other numbers, which means it's either way greater or way less than the other numbers. For example, if you make all A's on your tests and then you have one test that you bombed and got an F on, that F would be an outlier. Or if you made all F's on tests and then you studied really hard and made an A on a test, that A would be your outlier. So it goes either way, just numbers that are far different than the others. And they can really change the mean or the average. So an outlier affects the mean more than the median. So the median is going to be most representative when an outlier is present, because it's not going to be as affected. It's just the middle number. Now, mean is best whenever no outlier is present. And then mode is going to be best when a number occurs a whole bunch of times or a lot. So think back to the example. If you're making all A's and then on one test you bomb and get an F, that F can really drag down your average, especially if it's a low F, right? Or if you get a 0. So that's not going to be representative. Your average won't be representative of how good of a student you are. But the median, the middle one, if we put those in order from least to greatest, all I would have to do is put that F on the far left, and the middle number, how many A's do I have there? 4, 6, 7. So the middle number is going to be this A. So you would still have an A average. So that F wouldn't affect your median, but it would affect your mean. And mean would be representative if we didn't have that F. Then the mean would be a good useful tool. And mode is going to be helpful if you have a number that occurs a whole bunch. So for instance, let's say a basketball player scored 27 points on a lot of their games, and then scored 24 and 31 and maybe 26. So here would be an example whenever the mode would be very useful, because you have a number that occurs a whole bunch of times. So that's when mode would be best representative. All right, let's do one example to see how outliers affect our central tendency. How do they affect it? All right, so how are the measures of central tendency affected by the outlier? And your set of data, let's say, is 12, 13, 9, 10, 8, 31, 9, and 9. Now, first off, we need to identify the outlier. So which number is way different than the other numbers? I'm looking at my lowest number, 8, but that's not very different than 9, is it? So 8's not going to be my outlier. On the upper extreme, we have 31. 31's way bigger than the next number, which is 13. So 31 is going to be my outlier. It's way bigger than the other numbers. So now what I'm going to do is make a little chart, and I'm going to say the mean we want to find out. What's my other central tendency measurements? Median and mode. And we didn't talk about range, but range is, we can add that here. The range is just the highest minus the lowest. So we'll go ahead and calculate that as well. So the highest minus the lowest. So we have our little table. And on our table, we're going to do without the outlier, and with the outlier. So our mean, if we add up all those numbers, we should get 70 if we don't include the 31. In other words, right now I'm going to exclude the 31 and just add up the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. So I have 7 numbers. I add them up, I get 70. And 70 divided by my 7 gives me 10. So the mean there is 10. And then the median, I'm just going to put them in order from least to greatest. So if I do that, I should have 8, 9, 9, 9, 10, 12, 13. I'm not going to put the 31 there. And my middle number, I have 7 numbers, so 3, that means these should be crossed off. And I only have one middle number, it's 9. So 9 is my median. My mode is going to be 9 because it occurs more than all the other numbers. And my range is 13 minus my lowest number is 8. So I just took my biggest number 13, subtracted my smallest number 8, and I get 5. So those are my 4 answers for without the outlier. Now I'm going to include the outlier, so that 31 is going to be thrown back into the mix now. And now I don't have 7 numbers. Be careful, this is where people make mistakes. I have 8 numbers. So if I add those up, I already had 70 when I added up the 7. So if I add the 31, 70 plus 31 gives me 101. So I just do 101 divided by 8 numbers, since I included the outlier. And 101 divided by 8 gives us about 12.6. And now the median, I'm just going to go back to my example here. I'm just adding 31 into that mix, and now I have two middle numbers, the 9 and the 10. So I do 9 plus 10 divided by 2, and that would be 19 over 2. Or I could just think, what's halfway between 9 and 10? And I should get 9.5. So 9.5. And then the mode stays the same, right? 9 occurs 3 times before, it occurs 3 times with and without. The range is going to be much different, right? We have 31 as our new highest number, minus 8 our lowest number, and we get 23. So to answer all these out, I would say, I'm going to show this in a different, hopefully you can have room for another column there. I would add another column here and say that the mean went up by 2.6. How did I get that? I just did 12.6 minus 10. So it went up 2.6. In fact, all of these are going to go up, right? Except for the mode. So 9.5 minus 9, it went up 0.5 for the median. And then the mode, we would say no change. And then the range went up a lot, didn't it? 23 minus 5 gives us 18. So we would just say up 18. So as you can see, that's what I wanted you guys to see, the mean is not really, the mean is changing a lot more than the median. So that mean went up 2.6, but the median only went up a half a point, 0.5. So the mean's always going to be affected, almost always affected more than the median. And you can see the mode is almost never changed. It's not going to be changed by that outlier. All right. And now you know all about mean, median, and mode.